Alright, so one of the things that I found to be very true with respect to societies and the world is that society is made up of these sort of ideals and principles rather than frameworks, in the sense that you've got these fixed set of ideals and principles that guide how you should live your life, but they don't sort of tell you how to adapt to new situations that would be very specific to the scenario that you're experiencing, and because of which you end up in situations where you're not taking the most rational decisions. They're logical to the extent that they're following certain nearly autocratic rules, but they're not really what one would call well informed. So you've got these sort of nearly autocratic principles dictating your life, and that's about the individual, right? What happens when you sort of extrapolate those principles and sort of impose those principles on an entire society? There's this really good quote by, I believe his name is Arthur Schopenhauer. He was a German philosopher, I believe, sometime, born in the late 19th century. And he had this really good quote which basically spoke to this, particularly about people who don't, who like to think for themselves in societies which are based on rigid principles. What he said was, what the herd hates most is the one who thinks differently. It is not so much the opinion itself, but the audacity of wanting to think for themselves, something that they do not know how to do. And so it's like you've got this herd, right, which is sort of obeying these principles without updating them ever. There is no framework. There is maybe I'm confusing the terminology, but I do believe that's what it is. Like, principles are things which you live by, right? And a framework which lets you update those principles is a much needed sort of platform for you to be able to experiment and update those principles if needed. And people who and that reminds me of another quote: doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results is the definition of insanity. It was something like that. And so I think people try to live by these principles, and then they get stuck and absorbed into these cycles of just repeating the same thing over and over again. And I think the entire sort of society devolves into a very dysfunctional entity as a collective sort of thing. And I think that's really harmful for growth to happen. Like, it hurts the chances of any growth happening, because, and here's why: if you're living by certain principles anyone who does not live by those principles is automatically your enemy. And if they're automatically your enemy, the only way that you will be able to sustain yourself is if other people believe in the principles that you are standing for. So that means that if anyone is not obeying the principles of, or the ideologies that exist in the majority at a given place, regardless of whether those ideologies are right or wrong, the ones who are in a minority stand to lose, because they'll get outcasted by the majority of the people, because the majority have something to believe in. They have these principles and ideologies to believe in, and they use those very same ideologies to other the minority group in ways that wouldn't happen if both of those people were to exist in roughly the same number. Like, if it was 50% of people who follow ideology A and 50% of people who follow ideology B, there'd be, I'd say, a healthy segregation of ideologues, if there was a segregation. I mean, we're assuming that these ideologies are at war with each other, and so the humans would just, we won't hurt you, you don't hurt us, kind of sort of a peace treaty thing, truce. But when you have people who believe in ideology A, or either of them, in greater number, the minority always stands to lose, because not only does the minority feel more threatened, but okay, so why do they feel more threatened, I suppose, is the next question. They feel more threatened because, well, if you've got people with ideology A, so ideology A is the majority one, and if you've got those people talking with people from ideology B, and they slowly start to figure out, oh, okay, we think in different terms, very different people, what will start happening is people who follow ideology A will slowly but steadily start cutting themselves off of people who follow ideology B. And that's because, I think that's like, sort of, let's leave it at that for this particular episode.